Our next speaker is Hayden Ludwig. He is an investigative researcher from Capital Research Center, and he will be speaking on how the leftists are deceiving churches.
Thank you. Language matters. The words we use matter. Before we can win elections or make policy, we have to win the battle for America's mind. The political left knows this, which is why liberal activists are on a crusade to steal and redefine our words to suit their agenda. We've all seen this in the growth of popularity of socialism on college campuses. The typical 20-something is more likely than ever to say they support socialist policies. But if pressed on the definition, will define socialism as nothing more than helping the poor, or choosing generosity over greed, or even just fairness. What you won't find are facts, only exploited feelings. Our young people have the wrong definition of an ideology that's murdered hundreds of millions of people and still enslaves billions because we've let the left twist our language to control the political debate. Christians, conservatives, free-thinking independents, we're losing that debate. We're losing it in our churches, too. Secular leftists and their rented ministers have co-opted biblical language to bully believers into towing the far left's political line. Take the Lord's commandment to love our neighbors as ourselves, something that unites New Testament Christians with our older siblings in the Jewish faith. Left-wing ideologues have made this a mandate not to obey God, but to obey the anti-God agenda of the Democratic Party. We need to preach the whole gospel, these activists tell us. What they really mean is preaching open borders, wealth redistribution, socialized medicine, really anything other than the gospel. Nowhere is this deception more profound than the left's effort to subvert the pro-life movement. It's always been understood that someone who's pro-life believes that life begins at conception, not to radical environmentalists who are busy redefining pro-life to mean anything but that conviction. We must be completely pro-life, they tell us. That means supporting a Green New Deal that would replace our beautiful forests with a sea of ugly and unreliable wind turbines, all but outlaw driving and flying, and rob our children of access to cheap and abundant energy and the prosperity they bring. This is bright red socialism with a dab of green paint. No wonder that the Green New Deal's socialist author called the Green New Deal a how do you change the entire economy thing. Their goal is to defeat the powerful pro-life movement by making the definition of pro-life so powerless it means nothing at all. And this is how the left wins, not by convincing, but by deceiving. Christians should not be dazzled by these activists' claims to biblical authority. Phrases like creation care are nothing more than a mask for hardened atheists and environmentalists in the Sierra Club to fool you into supporting an agenda you'd never agree to. Groups like Jim Wallace's Sojourners, the Evangelical Environmental Network, and the National Religious Partnership for the Environment are lobby shops for the Democrats' devastating global warming policies. I speak from experience. Following donations from ultra-liberal donors like George Soros and San Francisco foundations to these wolves in sheep's clothing, funding they often deny. Are these groups faithful to the Word of God? We cannot read their hearts, but we sure can read their websites. These creation care activists offer prayers to pagan earth spirits to, and I quote, hold the government, especially the EPA, responsible for allowing corporations to pollute our waterways. This is a prayer. Other so-called Christian environmentalists use the Bible to demand tax increases on the wealthy to combat the sin of income inequality. Who are they fooling? This is the very definition of lobbying with a biblical veneer. For all the talk about being good stewards of the earth, there's little daylight between the people infiltrating our churches and the secular environmentalists they echo. So what do those environmentalists stand for? I've traced the history of their ideology back to someone you may know, Margaret Sanger, as well as the Marxists, eugenicists, and white supremacists who helped her found Planned Parenthood, today the largest provider of abortions in America. They believed in forcibly sterilizing people they deemed unfit to have children, and even lobbied presidents to create a federal population bureau to establish the racial health of this nation. There's simply no way to separate creation care and other calls for fake Christian environmentalism from the unrepentant socialists who spawned these falsehoods. Nor can environmentalism be separated from the pro-abortion lobby, nor the anti-life, anti-science ideology behind that. Christians rejected these abhorrent views then and now. Would we accept them if they came wrapped in biblical language? But there's hope. Our first duty is to seek the truth. We do that when we put on the whole armor of faith. Christ tells us that the gates of hell will not prevail against his church. That's not a call for Christian soldiers to stay on the defensive, but to take the battle to the very heart of the enemy. We do that by rejecting the lies infiltrating our churches, our homes, and our schools, and taking back our scriptural language. Let us love one another as our holy God requires, not as the godless define it. Let our care for creation reflect the glory of the Creator found in the pages of Genesis, not in government. Let us teach those who would twist Christ's words that compassion means bearing with one another in steadfastness, not creating more red tape in Washington. I pray you'll join us in November on the front lines of this important struggle between light and darkness, for the stakes could not be higher. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hayden Ludwig. I'm Matthew Bellis, and with me I have Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann, Pastor Jim Garlow, and Judge Soul there at the end. Congresswoman, let me start with you. That has been a fascinating talk given to us by Hayden, but why does it seem that way, that something so innocuous as is in the care of our planet, why does that promote socialism?
Well, because ultimately the goal is taxation. It is shrouded in compassion, but for a long time, for instance, the United Nations has lacked two things. That is a standing army and primarily a global taxation. Anytime you're talking about the environment, the end goal is to bring in money. And if I could just elaborate, if Al Gore would have gotten everything that he asked for in his global warming provisions, at the end of 100 years, the Earth's temperature might drop within a fraction of 1 degree. At a rate so small. This is if he got everything he wanted.
Sure.
You couldn't even measure it. But what was the goal? The goal was to get money, public money. And so ultimately, when you have people's money, you have control.
Yeah.
So they were looking for money and control.
And there you get socialism. Pastor Jim, there's a fervor in environmentalism that almost seems religious in itself. Is that what you have seen as well?
Well, it is a religion. There's no doubt about it. Religion is that which you find ultimate authority in. And it is religious. And Romans chapter 1, you either worship the Creator or you worship the creation. So it's clearly a religion, without a doubt.
Yeah.
And the issue of it, I want to underscore what the Congresswoman has spoken, and that Don Hodel, who was the Secretary of Interior under Reagan, and then Secretary of Energy at one point. So he'd be in two positions to know a lot about this. He's the first one that opened my eyes to the reality. He says it's not about, this was years ago, clean water, clean air, clean land. We all want that.
Sure.
This is about one thing, changing the way we have government.
Yeah.
It's taking away the notion, it effectively takes away private property.
Yeah.
I personally experienced this firsthand doing a building project in California dealing with 8 governmental agencies, federal, state, and county, on 125 acres that we owned, which should have cost us $24 million at best, ended up costing $52.5 million because of radical environmentalism. If I told you the story, you'd burst out crying, and I don't want to see you cry, Matt. But here comes a commercial.
Yeah.
They'll pick up my book, God Will See You Through This. One of the chapters is on what we were put through by the radical environmentalist in trying to build a church building in Southern California.
Documentarian Judge Saul, so many young people have been attracted to this type of environmentalism. Why is that whenever we see young people almost reject any type of religion in itself?
Well, brainwashing starting in the schools. If we want to look at kind of a redefining of words, just so people know, is like when you hear the word sustainable development, that's environmental Marxism.
Yeah.
If you hear these terms, it's all about the redistribution of wealth, using one cause after another to get you to give up money and to redistribute the wealth.
And environmentalism is just that they have the kids locked into it. They have their teachers are telling children, and pastors are telling children, they're teaching this in Sunday schools, that the world's going to end. They're not giving kids a bright future, an outlook on their life. They're telling the kids that the world is going to end. The only way they can save it is to save the environment, and instead of teaching science, they're teaching activism.
Yeah.
But it's not just in the public sphere, it's also within the churches. And we see a lot of pastors buy into this, jumping into sustainable development and sustainable this initiatives, and it's
Yeah. Congresswoman, how do we push back on a legislative front and this type of radical environmentalism?
Well, reject it. I mean, the main thing is you have to tell the truth about what this is. And that's the one great thing about being in Congress. You have the ability to take advantage of a knowledge factory. There's so much knowledge there. And if you just read the documents, like we heard some of our other speakers say, what they did is they read the documents.
Yeah.
When you read the documents, you ultimately see where they want to go. And so once you tell the truth and you expose them in a public setting, hopefully you can shame them or embarrass them, or at least your colleagues, into not voting for it anymore.
That's why you're in politics and I'm not. So wonderful. Thank you very much, panelists. I very much appreciate it. I'm Matthew Bellis, and you have been well versed.